people who had cheated were 3 times more likely to cheat. People high in narcissism are more likely to have affairs. There was one study where individuals who stared at an attractive alternative, like wandering eyes, the ones who stared for 100 milliseconds less were 50% less likely to cheat.
Whoa!
This is a painful thing to say, but I'll say it. The number one thing if someone wants to avoid being cheated on actually comes down to
Macken Murphy, you're a behavioral scientist and you've spent multiple years at Oxford studying attraction and infidelity. So today you're going to be our translator and help us understand everything we've always wanted to know about men and how they actually think. So first, please tell us, knowing human behavior, when a man is cheating, what signs will he start to show?
So red flags that someone might cheat on you, I would say high sociosexuality. So they're interested in uncommitted relationships. A lot of people think, oh, I'm dating this guy, he's a major playboy, but once he settles down with me, all that's gonna kind of go away and we're gonna have a monogamous thing. But if you think about it, he loved having one night stands with random women before he met you, right? He still loves doing that even though he's with you, right? He's just choosing not to do it. So he's resisting that temptation. That guy's much higher risk for infidelity than someone who doesn't like doing that sort of thing anyway. Like if a guy doesn't like having sex with random women, right? Even when he's single, he's much less likely to cheat because he's probably not gonna want to do that while he's in a relationship. This is very controversial, but it's very intuitive, right? I mean, there are so many predictive factors here. Like there was one study where individuals who stared at an attractive alternative, like wandering eyes, and the ones who stared for 100 milliseconds less were 50% less likely to cheat, right?
Whoa!
Yeah, that's interesting, right? So that's one of those things where, we see that if someone has high extra-pair interest, they are much more likely to cheat. Some people use past partner count as a proxy for this, quote unquote body count on the internet. That's just the common parlance.
But as in what, like the higher body count, the more likely you are to cheat?
Yeah, so for example, in McQuivey's analysis, individuals who had more than 5 past partners were twice as likely to cheat than individuals who had less than 5 past partners. But it's almost certainly just a proxy for sociosexuality.
Oh.
They're like how much they like sleeping around.
So assume narcissists are more likely to cheat?
Yes. So dark triad traits, that's very good. So there's 3 aspects of the dark triad. There's psychopathy, there's Machiavellianism, and there's narcissism. And there's mixed but broadly supportive evidence that people high in narcissism are more likely to have affairs. Dark triad traits like narcissism, that would be a risk factor. And narcissism is a tricky one because a lot of people find narcissism quite sexy because it's confidence or it projects confidence. And then, they tend to be well-groomed, spend time on their looks. One of the highest personality appearance correlations we have, it's still not very high, is between narcissism and physical attractiveness. So narcissists tend to be better looking because they work more on their looks.
Really? Is that why?
Well, that's what people think, yeah. It's the myth of Narcissus, right? I mean, he's spending a lot of time in the mirror or a lot of time looking in the pond. There was a meta-analysis that looked at this, and there is a correlation between being narcissistic and being good looking. And that could be because being good looking makes you more narcissistic, but I think it's more likely that being more narcissistic makes you more good looking because you spend more time working on your looks.
I was going to ask you, it could be like, which one came first? The chicken or the egg? Because if you were really young, everyone's like, you're so handsome.
Then it goes to your head.
Of course the poor kid's going to grow up being a narcissist. Like, I'm so handsome.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I would say sociosexuality, dark triad traits. I would also say their environment. So if all their friends are having affairs and they're totally blasé about it, that indicates a lot about their values, and also it indicates who they're trying to hang out with, right? It's a real indicator that they don't think infidelity is that bad. Their familial environment is similarly important. So we know that infidelity runs in families, right? That's quite well established.
Do you know the percent? Is it true? Is it because they see it and they think, oh, it's okay for me to do it?
I mean, this is controversial, but there's good data backing it up. So I'll say it. I think that infidelity is partially heritable. It has a similar heritability to borderline personality disorders, borderline personality disorder in twin studies. And so it's one of those things where people think, how could infidelity be genetic? Because it's like an action. Like, how could an action be genetic? Because an action is a choice. But your choices are undergirded by your psychological makeup. So obviously DNA is going to have some impact on a person, how a person interfaces. So like if I were to say something not controversial, like risk-taking propensity is somewhat genetic, right? People would be like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
So like taking risks.
Yeah, taking risks is somewhat, people would be like, yeah, it makes sense that would be somewhat genetic. That seems about right. But if I say cheating is genetic, then it's too far, then it seems crazy. But someone's risk-taking propensity and their degree of sexual desire, those are going to make them more likely to cheat. Yeah. And so it's not surprising to me, even though it's a controversial thing to say, it's not a surprising thing to me at all. I would say, look, if this person is from a totally clean background where no one in their family is cheating, mom and dad are happy, they're together, their friends are all really upstanding gentlemen, I would say, yeah, that guy's probably a better shout than the guy who, even if he seems great, his parents are cheating on each other, his brother's cheating, and his friends are all cheating, and he's totally blasé about it.
What about rule breaking?
Yeah, so those that goes back to the dark triad. So we see that dark triad traits are associated with impulsivity, callous disregard for moral norms and structures. And so yeah, I would say that those are almost certainly. I don't know of a specific study on rule breaking versus cheating, but I would bet money that those are going to come up as associated. Yes.
So talk to me a little about sexual narcissists. So how do you spot them? How do you know that they're a sexual narcissist, and how is that a trap?
Well, essentially, it's someone's propensity to think that they're, God's gift to the opposite gender in bed. And the reason that I've brought this up in the past isn't because it's a hugely significant predictor. It's more just because it's useful for people to recognize, like, hey, some of the things that make someone more likely to cheat on you are also attractive. And so there's a trade-off there. This is a painful thing to say, but I'll say it. People are generally not going to prefer someone who is incredibly nervous and self-conscious and clumsy and not liking their own performance in bed. They're not very confident, right? Mm-hmm. Sexual narcissists are people who are like, yeah, I'm great at this. This is going to be awesome, basically. And a lot of people find that very attractive, right? That's certainly more appealing than the inverse. But it is also associated with infidelity. So people who are very, quote unquote cocky in the bedroom are also more likely to have affairs, most likely. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense. I mean, if you're full of confidence in that department, mm-hmm. then you're probably not worried about approaching someone at a bar and trying to pursue that. You probably think it's going to be great. Yeah. Whereas I would say that the average person is like, not 100% sure of themselves in that sort of context. Yeah. They might kind of clumsily walk over. Yeah.
All right, so I have a bit of a true or false for you, if you don't mind. I'd love to kind of either debunk or confirm some myths. So true or false, men cheat more than women?
Yeah, that's very much true.
Okay. True or false, once a cheater, always a cheater?
Well, it's true enough. I think that that's a piece of folk wisdom that is widely disseminated because it is useful. In Kayla Knopp's longitudinal study, she found that people who had cheated in a previous relationship were 3 times more likely to cheat in their next relationship. So not once a cheater, always a cheater, right? It wasn't that they had 100% probability of cheating the next relationship, but it's pretty damn close. And so I would say that as a piece of folk psychological wisdom, once a cheater, always a cheater is very useful. So
you also said, though, that people who have been cheated on are more likely to be cheated on again. Yeah,
and that's in the same study. Like, I was speaking to a woman the other day who, she's a close female friend. And she was saying, basically like, Macken, you've got all this kind of data stuff. She's newly single. She's like, tell me, like, what sort of guy should I be after, that sort of thing, statistically, if I don't want what happened last time to happen again, basically. And I start talking in kind of my boring, monotone way. I'm like, well, you want someone who has all the things I said earlier, like low sociosexuality, they're a nice guy, not too much of a bad boy, coming from a stable home environment. And she says, well, that guy sounds pretty boring, right? Uh-huh. So this is the thing, is that a lot of people have mate preferences that lead them into bad scenarios. So if you're someone who has very strong mate preferences for traits that co-vary with infidelity, such as being a narcissistic playboy, well, if you find narcissistic playboys really attractive, well, you're going to end up with one and then the other and then the next one, and you get cheated on over and over. So when you hear like, oh, if someone was cheated on in their past relationship, they're twice as likely to get cheated on in their next relationship, it's almost surely because their mate preferences are leading them back down the same unfortunate pathways.
That's so powerful. Okay, true or false? Men are biologically wired to want multiple women.
I do not like the term biologically wired, but if you're saying that men have an evolved desire for sexual variety, absolutely. I would say that women also have an evolved desire for sexual variety that is motivated by some different selection pressures, but it is not as strong. So if you ask men and women, hey, how many partners do you want to have over the next 10 years? Men will consistently give higher numbers than women, right? But oftentimes, women's isn't just one, right? So it's not that they have no desire for variety. It's not the case, because there are evolutionary benefits to be derived from that desire, but it's less strong than men because they are lacking that very powerful benefit of being able to have multiple partners pregnant with their offspring simultaneously. Women cannot do this, men can. And so there's a difference there strategically.
Okay, next one. True or false? If a man cheats, it's just physical. When a woman cheats, it's emotional. All right, guys, we'll be right back with Macken. But real quick, if you're done playing small, done being pushed around, and you're ready to build unshakable confidence in every area of your life, then smash that subscribe button right now. Every episode of Women of Impact is here to help you build your confidence, own your worth, set strong boundaries, and make sure you never lose your voice or power again. So go ahead, smash that subscribe button. Now, back to the episode. Okay, next one. True or false? If a man cheats, it's just physical. When a woman cheats, it's emotional.
False.
I think, yeah, you debunked that. All right, true or false? Men cheat down, women cheat up.
Well, it's complicated. What I would say is that men and women both cheat up in terms of physical attractiveness on average, but men and women also both cheat down in terms of parental attractiveness. So what we found is that when people have affairs, they tend to have affairs with people who they perceive as more sexy, but less competent as a potential co-parent. So it goes back to this dualism where you want your primary partner who you can invest in offspring together and you have this tight bond. And then the secondary partners, it's more about conceptive benefits. So genes, additional offspring, etc.
All right, so now I actually want to move on to why men cheat and the reasons why men cheat versus the reasons why women cheat.
Well, I planned a study that I then ran at the University of Melbourne, and it was to fill what I would describe as a gap in the evolutionary, psychological, scientific literature. And what we did was we essentially sent out a pilot survey to 1,500 individuals, or a pre-screening survey, to find individuals who had had affairs. And so we asked them, why did you cheat? And I think that it's important to recognize that people are liable to lie and downplay in these scenarios. So this is known in the literature as social desirability bias, where people want to give answers to questions that are socially desirable, right? And so that introduces a lot of lying. For men and women, the number one motivation for infidelity that they reported was relationship dissatisfaction, right? But what I want to the listeners to go home with is that it's true that people say that relationship dissatisfaction is a strong motivator for an affair, but I don't really think of it as generally a motivator so much as a permission giver. Because an act of infidelity comes with benefits and it comes with potential costs. And the primary cost of infidelity, I would say, is that they will lose their primary relationship, right? So let's say your primary relationship is a 10. Not in terms of their physical appearance, of course, in terms of the quality, like it's a 10 out of 10, right? Then committing infidelity, even if it could lead to more offspring, even if it could lead to you getting some other benefits, additional resources, whatever benefit you might get, the risk of losing that 10 out of 10 primary relationship is so great that those benefits don't stack up, right? But on the other end, if you're very dissatisfied in your relationship, like you don't even really want to keep it anyway, like you don't even really care if they break up with you, like it's not that fun anymore, you guys aren't connecting like you used to, and let's say it's now a 2, right? Then the benefit could be a 3, and it's still enough, you know what I mean?
Right,
in terms
risk
of like,
versus reward.
Yeah, the risk versus reward calculus. So yes, it is true that in most women and a plurality of men, the most common motivation is relationship dissatisfaction as a stated motivation. Okay. But I would say that's a very socially desirable stated motivation. People are much more sympathetic to that motivation than I was aroused, right? So it's very socially desirable, so you can expect some over-reporting there. And then 2, it's not really a motivation eo ipso, right, in and of itself, because it's, unless you are trying to break up the relationship, which was, so let's say the primary relationship is it's a -10, right? Like you want to get out of it, then you might cheat just to end it. That was a less than 5% of cases phenomenon in my sample of people who cheated. So that's not the usual. I would say usually it's a permission giver as opposed to a motivator in and of itself. And I would say that the motivators are consistent with other research on human mating, much more physical than people say, frankly. Very few women, for example, said that they cheated because the other guy was hot, right? But the vast majority of women in our sample thought, when we measured it more objectively, or more sneakily, I should say, then the vast majority of women who cheated thought that their affair partner was hotter than their primary partner.
Wow. Okay, I'd actually love to go back to why men cheat versus why women cheat. So you said the first reason for both is that they have relationship dissatisfaction, but the other 2 out of 3 points, the other 2 are actually different. So you've said, so the reason why women cheat, let's just start there. So relationship dissatisfaction. Number 2, having an uninterested partner. And then number 3 is revenge. So you said that 15.5% of women state that they had an affair out of revenge because their partner had an affair.
Yes, so I would say that the man's fidelity is a huge part of what motivates the woman's fidelity and vice versa. Like, it may be the case that initially there's no one else that she wants to see, and so it doesn't really come up. But if there came a time in her life where she's genuinely tempted, and she can't say to herself like, oh, he wouldn't do that to me because he's literally doing it all the time, it's very likely that will be reciprocated. And that is in part supported by my data, which found that, again, a huge contingent of women who cheat, much more so than men, cheat because their primary partner cheated on them first. And again, I wouldn't say that that's a motivator in and of itself in most cases. If I had to guess, it's more of a permission granter, where it's like your partner cheats, or one's partner cheats, and then even a couple years later, one finds themselves in a scenario where they're like, oh, I'm tempted, I would like to see this other person. It's very hard to demotivate that when you know that you've been betrayed in that way.
What's interesting though is that isn't the man's reasons, right? The man isn't like, well, she slept with someone else, so I'm gonna get revenge.
That's correct.
on her.
I believe that was only 5% of cases for men.
Yeah.
Now, it does happen. I would say though that men would act that way if women cheated at a higher rate. So this is an important bias in the data that men cheat more than women. And so this is a controversial thing to say on the internet, but it's not a controversial thing to say in academia. When you ask men and women, have you cheated? Men say they cheat more than women. When you ask men and women, have you been cheated on? Women say they've been cheated on more than men. And even when you ask the third person, the person on the kind of outskirts of the relationship, like, have you been successful as a mate poacher? Women generally report more success as mate poachers than men do.
As in,
right?
let me take the guy away from his woman.
Being an interloper, right? Being the other party, colloquially the home wrecker, right? Generally, women have a higher hit rate when they attempt that. And then also, look, I mean, some people say, oh, maybe women just lie more, but we have research on lying as well, and that research generally indicates that men lie more. So I would be very confident in saying that men cheat more than women. The reason this is relevant for the revenge point that we were just touching on is that women have more opportunity to cheat for revenge as an excuse because women are getting cheated on at a higher rate than men.
Interesting.
So men probably would cheat for revenge much more if they were getting cheated on first much more. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the reasons men cheat, relationship dissatisfaction, having an attractive affair partner.
So I'm really glad you brought this up because yes, men stated that they were more motivated by the physical attractiveness, right? So these are all people, to remind listeners, these are all people who have actually had affairs. And we asked them why they did it. And the men said they were more motivated by the affair partner being physically attractive. And so you might think, oh, case closed, men are more motivated by the physical aspect of things. But then when we actually ran the stats, we had them assess their primary partner and their affair partner physically, right? Like, how physically attractive is how hot are they? How hot is the person you cheated with, right? And both men and women found, on average, there was a lot of variance, on average, they found the person that they cheated with was hotter than the person that they cheated on. And there was no statistically significant difference between men and women in that respect, which implies that women are understating how much the physical aspect influences affairs. And this is something that we see in other research. Women care more about looks in practice than they say. Now, men also care more about looks in practice than they say, but the difference, the gap between what they say and what they do in this case is smaller. Now, just so people know that I'm not, picking on women being inconsistent here, I'll give another example with men. So men tend to say that they don't care about a woman's career, they don't care about a woman's education, they don't care about a woman's ambition, but then you actually test it and it turns out that men actually care more than they say about those things. So in the same way that a woman might say, oh, I don't really care how he looks, I just want him to be nice to me. And a man might say, oh, I don't care if she works at Denny's, right? I don't mind even though I'm a lawyer, da 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 da. In practice, that lawyer is going to date another lawyer, right? They're going to date another high-powered, successful woman.
So just to kind of tie everything together that we've just been talking about, so the differences of why, there's one last thing of the reason why men cheat. And this is the third point, and you've said sexual desire.
Yeah, I would say that it's interesting because sexual desire is distinct from sexual dissatisfaction, right? So one is a push and the other is a pull. One is kind of a permission giver, so to say, and one is a motivator. And so I think that the number one thing, if someone wants to avoid being cheated on, actually comes down to partner selection as opposed to what they do within the relationship. So choosing someone who has a low probability of having an affair, someone who doesn't love having one-night stands, right? That isn't their personality. Someone who isn't high in dark triad traits. I mean, this is something that's quite funny, is that you'll see someone who's dating someone who they cheat at their schoolwork, they cheat on their business partners, they cheat their friends, they lied when they're late, that kind of thing. They're constantly bullshitting everybody. And then they're surprised when they get cheated on. And it's like, well, this person is cheated in every aspect of their life. Of course, it's going to cross over to there.
You have mentioned in the past a hunger study. So talk to me about the correlation between how hungry a man is and the type of woman he's attracted to.
This is my favorite part of the research. I find it really interesting.
Coming up.
If you want to mate for life, you...
Exciting news, guys, because Paleo Valley is having the biggest sale ever for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And I'm telling you right now, so you don't sleep on it. Because this time of year, let's face it, you're eating heavy meals, you're running around non-stop. That's why you need to go and stock up right now on paleo beef sticks. Guys, I'm absolutely obsessed. Right before we started filming this, I actually threw 10 of these in my hubby's bag because they're so good when you're traveling, if you need them on the go. They're made with 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef, naturally fermented for gut health, and packed with protein that actually fills you up. They taste absolutely amazing, and they make taking care of yourself really easy, especially when life is just feeling utterly chaotic. So for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, you can go and get up to 35% off all Paleo Valley products, including these beef sticks, and you'll get a free gift with your purchase. Trust me, you're going to want to click the link below and grab these right now. Your energy, your digestion, and your sanity will thank you. I'm telling you, they will thank you.
When men are experiencing resource insecurity or instability, including hunger, they become more attracted to bigger women. So there's evidence for this cross-culturally. For example, if you go somewhere like urban Japan, you'll find that women are trying to keep their weight down to be more attractive. Or London, right? You're from London. Women are trying to move more and eat less to be sexier, right? That's the norm. If you go to somewhere like among the Efik of Nigeria, you'll find that they are trying to move less and eat more in order to become more attractive. And for example, among the South African Zulu, BMIs of up to 38 were considered highly attractive, and 38 in a Western context would be considered morbidly obese. So we have a variety of convergent sources of evidence, including, as you mentioned, these hunger studies, where, for example, researchers hung out outside of a dining hall, and they measured men's preference for female figure before and after entering the dining hall. And they found that before men entered the dining hall, they preferred bigger women than they did when they were leaving. So why is it the case that when men are poorer, when men have more economic instability, when men are in contexts where they are physically hungry, why is it that they prefer women who have more copious body fat? Well, if we think about this from an evolutionary strategic point of view, like why would our brains evolve to have this sort of plasticity strategically? If you were experiencing a famine, it would be better to go for a woman who has signals that she has food, right? Perhaps to share it with you, but more importantly, has food that will, and body fat, stored calories, that will allow her to survive the famine and stay fertile throughout the famine. So we know that losing weight, losing too much weight, being in a state of caloric deficit can cause infertility, right? At least temporarily. And so if there was a famine and men had to choose mates, our male ancestors who recognized, hey, I'm really hungry, right? There's no food around. I should go for women who have food and have enough body fat to stay fertile throughout this period. Those men had a selective advantage. And this seems to have left this scar on our evolved psychology today, this very interesting mark, where even in a modern context, undergraduates at a dining hall, they will subtly shift their preferences towards slightly heavier women on the way in versus on the way out.
And so the wealthier, more successful guy who's choosing a woman, let's say, who's got lower BMI, that's because he feels like he has a lot of resources, so she's not going to die and things like that?
Yeah,
like, is that why?
It's very clear why men like body fat. And one thing that's interesting is that if you look at, a lot of people kind of are taken aback by that, like, isn't fat bad? But if you look at what parts of the body men are most attentive to, it's literally like the thighs and the buttocks and then the breasts, right? And so what are those? Those are fat stores, right? So men are very attentive to fat and very attracted to fat in some places across cultures. It's a little more confusing why men also have a preference for thinness in contexts of abundance. It may be because being thin is associated with social status. It could be the association between thinness and physical health. So in a context of abundance, then yeah, it's probably healthier to be somewhat thinner compared to much, much heavier. And it could also be because it's a signal of youth. We all accumulate mass as we age to some degree, or most of us do. And so if someone is lower body weight, that makes them look younger. So there's several reasons there.
Yeah, what's interesting is I've spent my whole life being told that as a woman, be as slim as you possibly can. Men like slim women. Growing up in London.
That's probably true in London, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Came to America, tried to basically count calories, run on the treadmill my whole life, then got massive gut issues, and I lost so much weight. I lost my period. I didn't have my period for over 10 years. Like, I was skinny as hell. And recently I started on hormones. Yeah. My husband turned around to me about 3 weeks ago, and he was like, oh my God, you look so sexy. And I was like, I don't feel it, but thank you. Like, I was trying to take compliments. And he's like, no. He's like, your hips are filled out, your butt's filled. And he was like drooling. And I was like, well, if I'd known this earlier, I wouldn't have run on the treadmill for all those hours that I've wasted my life. But it was really hard. It's what you've been told society wants versus what is actually true.
Well, this is the classic experience for women, actually, even in the West. So there's some risk of us conflating our prior conversation about the hunger versus our current conversation about perceptions, because they are different topics. But one thing that is quite consistent across the Anglosphere is that women think men prefer thinner figures than they actually do. And for women who are having trouble kind of believing this, you can think about the opposite phenomenon, which is that men think women prefer bigger muscles than they actually do. So it's true that women
or bigger penis, if I can be honest.
Yes, yeah, that's true as well. So men think that women prefer very muscular men, but the truth is that women actually just prefer muscular men, right? Yeah. And women think that men prefer very thin women, but then when you research it, men only prefer thin women, right? On average, in our cultural milieu. And this manifests in a very intuitive way, and it's actually been shown empirically as well in this context, which is that if you compare women's figures in women's magazines versus men's magazines, this becomes immediately obvious. You will see it straight away. Like if you go into a gas station or an airport and you say, okay, let's look at the women in the magazines designed for men, right? You're like, oh, you know, they're definitely thin, but they're not like that thin. Like they've got quite soft figures. Yeah. And then you look at the magazines aimed at women, and incredibly svelte. You know, I'm not saying either is better than the other, I'm looking at this as a researcher, but I will say that this misperception may still be beneficial. So it could be the case, for instance, that the status that you derive from being an extremely thin woman, right, adds to your attractiveness more than being optimal thinness for men.
Yeah, oh my God, that's so true.
So the strategic landscape is very complicated. Like it's easy to say like, oh, I just want to calibrate my behavior to the preferences of the opposite sex. But part of the preferences of the opposite sex are how the same sex interfaces with you. Like if I were to double the size of my arms, right, that probably wouldn't be optimal for my girlfriend's preferences, right? But I bet you all the guys around me would think it was so sick that she'd probably still think it was cool. You know what I mean? Like it has this social impact, and thinness can do the same thing.
So in talking about attraction, women, I think, ask a lot, what do men care more about? Is it the face or the body? And there's a study called the box study, I believe, if you don't mind explaining that.
Well, it's been colloquially referred to in that manner. So it's an interesting way to capture a preference. Because you can ask someone, you know, like, do you care more about the face or the body when dating? And that would be one way of examining that, right? You could just say and then see what they answer. But what they did was actually like a revealed preference, where they said, here's a person that you could date, essentially, and there's a box over their face and a box over their body. When deciding whether to date them, do you want to see their face or do you want to see their body? Now, women wanted to see the guy's face, right? And they preferred to see his face, whether it was short-term or long-term. So whether it was a one-night stand type situation or a long-term relationship, they wanted to know, like, what's this guy's face card, so to say? Like, what's he working with there? And I think that that's pretty consistent with what I've seen in reviewing women's romantic heartthrob leads. I mean, if you look at the sort of guys who are, like, frontlining these shows and movies as women's heartthrobs, they often have good bodies, often don't have particularly impressive physiques, but they always have a good face. Like you never see someone who's got like a terrible face, who's like the guy in a romantic movie, almost never. So that's not surprising. With men, they found a different result. When it was a long-term relationship, they were like women. They wanted to see the face. But when it was a short-term relationship, a slight majority of them wanted instead to see the body. So people ask, you know, hey, do men care more about a woman's face or a woman's body? And I would say that the answer is it depends on the context. Short term, probably for most men, the body, but it was a slight majority. Long term, vast majority, face.
That's interesting. Is that because, do you think it's short term, it's just going to be a short term relationship, so you're just going to have wild sex, so you kind of want them to have a good body, because that's really what...
I think it might be that simple, to be honest. It's like we were talking about earlier, where a relationship is like a very long podcast. So you're spending lots of time like interfacing with the person's physical face. But if it's a short-term relationship, their body becomes much more relevant.
Something else I heard you say, so the difference between a man having a tattoo and a woman having a tattoo. So how do women perceive men with tattoos?
We don't have really good data on it, to be honest. There's some like I'm taking out my tattoos as I speak.
I know, I was like,
for this section,
let me get them out. Get them out.
Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much good evidence that women like them or dislike them. However, I would say that the social signal of a tattoo is probably not just like signaling attractiveness. Like some forms of beautification, they are geared towards signaling to like other males, right? Male rivals, potentially. It could be a health signal of some sort.
How is it a health signal?
Well, people with tattoos generally have better immune systems in some research.
Really?
Yeah, and they think that the reason is because you're essentially like, every time you get a tattoo, you're like boosting your immune system for a second because your body does this huge immune response. And so if you have lots of tattoos, then it's like you're dosing, and essentially doing reps of like your immune system responding to a wound. It's interesting. I would say that the data we have indicates that the average woman doesn't really have much of a preference either way. Like tattoos are neither strongly preferred nor strongly dispreferred. The data we have on women is actually pretty consistent though, that men don't really like tattoos. However, there was one study where they put fake tattoos on women, right? And they had them go out to the beach and they sometimes sent them out with the fake tattoos, sometimes sent them out natural. And what they found was that when they had the fake tattoos on, they got approached by men more. So one way of looking at this would be a revealed preference, where it's like men say they don't care about tattoos, but then in practice they find them alluring, right? Or it could be that men are dealing with a conflict between attractiveness and approachability. So this is something we see with hair color as well, that brunette women are rated as more attractive on average, not in all studies, but I would say that that's the thrust of it. However, blonde women get approached more in experiments. And it could be, again, the same tension where it's like, balancing the most attractive woman with I don't want to get rejected, and thinking like, oh, a blonde is maybe less likely to reject me, or a woman with tattoos is going to be, you know, less likely to reject me, that sort of thing. Because there's all these stereotypes about tattoos and promiscuity, which, by the way, I mean, they're stereotypes, but they're also true, is that people with tattoos are on average more promiscuous. It shouldn't be that surprising, right? If it, like someone with no tattoos is probably much less likely to have tons of, you know, sexual partners.
Is that going back to the risk thing?
Yeah, it's probably the underlying personality variable that makes you interested in it. But it could also be, and this is a good point that you're kind of getting at here, that it could be that tattoos are a signal of sociosexuality to some degree, where it's like, if you're someone who wants to engage in short-term mating, and now I'm gonna hide them. If you're someone who wants to engage in short-term mating, maybe you put on and get tattoos in order to signal to others that that's what you're after.
That's what I was going to ask, because in that study with the fake tattoos, which I love, by the way, is it that the women with the fake tattoos get approached more because the guy is looking like, okay, well, if I'm not going to get rejected, she clearly is a little edgy. She's not afraid to go and go against the grain.
Yeah, to go out on a date with a random guy who's just met.
Right. So if I'm just going to chat someone up, I'm going to go for the person with tattoo. Versus, I'd love to see somehow a study on if men would still approach women with tattoos more if it was based on a long-term engagement and not just a hookup.
So there's with approaches, counting approaches, it's confounded because maybe they're after hookups. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so now I actually really want to move on to jealousy. So talk to me about jealousy. Who's more likely to be jealous, men or women? And is there a difference in why we're jealous and what we're jealous over?
Yeah, there actually is. I'm laughing because I actually had an experience with jealousy today, which I might share, which is pretty funny.
If you don't mind.
One thing that we see is that men are more jealous over physical aspects, and women are more jealous over emotional and investment-related aspects.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so you told me I could swear earlier, so I'll say
swear,
this. There's a colloquial saying that, like, oh, the first thing that a man says when he gets cheated on is, did you fuck him? And the first thing that a woman says is, do you love her, right? And there's actually some data indicating that stereotype actually is true, and that there is some difference there where men are more likely to be like, hey, what happened sexually? Whereas women are like, hey, what happened emotionally, on average? So physicality versus emotionality. This could be because the greatest risk from an evolutionary perspective of infidelity for men is that they could be quote unquote cuckolded, where they end up raising a kid that isn't theirs, unbeknownst to them. Whereas the greatest risk to women is that they lose their mate, which would be more likely if it's emotional. I will say that both men and women in the West are generally more bothered by the sexual aspect, at least in America. So sexual infidelity is still considered a bigger deal by both sexes. It's just that it's considered a bigger deal by men, whereas emotional infidelity is considered a relatively less big deal by women, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I had kind of a funny experience here. You know the way some men will get jealous of what a woman's wearing on a night out? That's kind of a physical jealousy, right? It's like, why are you wearing that? You're going out here, you're signaling all these physical traits. That's making me jealous.
You're going out with your girlfriends, why is your skirt so short?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a classic thing. It's a classic experience. It's something that people see a lot of. I kind of experienced the reverse sexual psychology today when I rented a Mustang convertible this morning. How are you getting around, Macken? My girlfriend's texting me. I'm like, look what car I'm in. And then she's immediately like, why are you out in this? Like, what are you doing? Right. So that's essentially like the male equivalent of me going out in a low-cut top to the club is that I'm driving down the LA streets in the convertible Mustang. So again, it's like the emotional aspects versus, or the investment aspects versus the physical aspect. So we do see that sex difference.
Yeah. Now, I don't have any study, but I've heard so many women say this, so I'm going to say, and I don't know if you know. It's funny that men get weird about women dressing up when they go out with their friends, because the truth is, when you ask any woman, most women, when you're going out, whether it's double date or like a group or a party, and you say, who are you dressing up for? You dress up for your girlfriends.
Yeah, it's the status competition.
Yeah.
It makes sense because that status competition is going to result in more attention from potential mate poachers, incipient mate poachers. So like, again, with the Mustang example, like, I'm not doing that to attract anyone, right? I'm doing that for me, so to say, or I'm doing it for like other guys maybe, right? But that status competition or whatever can still result in attention. And so if women are, so it could still, the two things can be true at once. Like, it could still be the case that like when women go out in a group, they're kind of having their own little beauty competition. Like, we all want to look hot, we all want to look desirable, right? That makes a lot of sense. It could also be an internal thing where it's like, hey, I want to like feel good about myself. But regardless of the intention, it still results in the factual matter that if you look better going to the club, more mate poachers are going to show up. And for a man, if he's sitting at home, he might be thinking like, I can't compete with all these guys. So he wants to lower the volume of attention, so to say.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Can I poke a little?
Yeah, of course.
Are you sure there's not even like a 2% where you're like, if a woman looks at me, I do look pretty cool. Like, I'm going to be honest, and you don't have to answer. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to be very honest. When I dress up and I walk and I see a guy look, it feels great. I'm never going to act on it.
Yeah.
And I love my husband more than life itself. Like, I would never fucking cheat on him. Never, ever, ever, ever. If he cheated on me, I'd be out the door. I'd never cheat back. Like, that's just not me. So when I get dressed up, I'm 46. So if I'm like at a bar with my girlfriend and a guy looks over and he looks me up, I'm like, still got it.
Yeah.
I still got it.
That's very
and I'll
normal.
even go home and tell my husband, I'm like, babe, this guy tried to chat me up.
Yeah.
And he's like, you still got it, babe. Because if a mate poacher came up to me, it wouldn't even dawn on me to acknowledge it or accept it. And my husband trusts me enough to know that. So when I look sexy, I do it to make myself feel better.
Yeah.
And part of me feeling better is when a guy looks at me.
Yeah, I think that that's very innocent and very natural. I don't think it signals any infidelitous intentions. No. And what's funny actually is that the attention of mate poachers can actually be used to improve your treatment within your own relationship. So I really picked up on you saying, oh, I go home and I tell my husband. And you might think, like a lot of people might think, like strategically, like why would that benefit people? Because people do that, right? Like when people get hit on, they do tend to tell their partners. One of it is signaling commitment. Like, hey, by the way, I was in this situation and I didn't act on it, right? But another thing is just saying, hey, by the way, I still got it. Like, by the way, I am still actually high mate value. So one thing that I think a lot of people...
they want to make their partner jealous.
Yeah.
That isn't why I do it.
Well, jealousy inducement, is exactly one of the mechanisms by which you can increase the perception of your own mate value. It's like getting them jealous. So one thing that a lot of people will have an experience with is like being at a party or in a social scenario. I've definitely had this where it's like a person of the opposite gender starts chatting you up, and it kind of feels like, oh, this person is like kind of taking an interest in me to some degree. I'm not really sure what's going on here. And you're kind of having the conversation, and then 3 seconds later, their boyfriend or husband comes over and joins, and you're like, what was this? Like, why did you start this interaction? Like, now I'm confused. Like, are you just like trying to make friends, or what's going on? But one thing that we see is that people self-report this, that they will deliberately induce jealousy in a partner by soliciting flirtation. I'm not saying that you're doing this, of course, but soliciting flirtation from another person. This is something that David Buss talks about in his book. Let's say, and he's an evolutionary psychologist. Let's say you're a 6, right? And your partner's a 7, right? And you are all, out in a social scenario. If you can get the attention of the 8 right? Who's there, and he comes up and starts talking to you. Maybe the 7 looks at you and is like, hang on, wait, I miscalculated. You must be, maybe you're up here. And then they start to take more interest, if that makes sense. So people do that quite a bit.
It does. That's so interesting. And in the story that I told, it's interesting because I think if you don't realize what a healthy relationship me and my husband have, you may perceive it as you're just trying to make him jealous.
No, I didn't at all.
No. I'm not saying you, but I'm saying I actually understand why someone would. So it's interesting to see how certain tactics can be insidious and like really deliberate, and other things actually bring you together. So for me and my husband, we just always swore we were going to tell each other the truth. And again, when I'm 46, like I'm like, I've still got it. When I'm 70, you better believe I'm going to remember the times that the guys hit on me at the bar. And I actually remember a time I was with a bunch of girlfriends, and my girlfriends are pretty hot. So we're all at the bar, and this guy comes over, and I hate to say it, but he wasn't really in our league.
Yeah.
But he comes over, and a couple of my friends were really rude to him. And I felt so bad. And when he left, they were like, can you believe he tried to chat us up? I basically said, ladies, when you're in your 80s, you're going to bloody wish that a guy found you attractive.
Yeah, you gotta
so
appreciate
it doesn't mean that you have to accept it. It doesn't mean that it has to be a toxic thing. But I think like that guy just took the courage to walk across the bar and come and talk to, 4 women. Like, we should like applaud him, not like diminish him.
I think that's a really good perspective. I think it's a really healthy perspective to have. One thing that I'm thinking about is that people, like one of the reasons that your friends likely took offense is that we all know that people tend to mate assortatively. So they tend to pursue people who are around their own league ballpark in general. And so that adds a strategic variable here where you can judge your own attractiveness to an extent based on the sort of people who are approaching you. And so if someone approaches you who's not very attractive, you think like, hang on, wait, like it kind of gives you this, it gives you like a bad feeling. It's because of this like mate value recalibration where it's like, hang on, they think that they're in my league. Am I? Right? That kind of thing. It's a terrible experience to have, but it's definitely not an unfamiliar one.
So in talking about jealousy, is there any biological thing where jealousy shapes us differently? So as a woman, unfortunately, it breaks my heart, but a lot of women, when we feel jealous, we think it's about us, right? Like, oh, I'm not pretty enough. So sometimes we just pour it onto us. I need to do better. I have to be a better girlfriend. I have to be a better wife. I have to look prettier. Like we pour it onto us. Do men do the same when it comes to jealousy? Have you seen like what our responses are in that way?
Yeah, so that's one form of mate guarding is appearance enhancement to an extent, where it's like, how can I make myself more appealing? And not just appearance enhancement, but mate value enhancement in general, where it's like, how can I make myself so appealing that I can beat these competitors away? So like you see this when like a man gets cheated on or something, that he starts going to the gym a lot.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. Or a woman gets cheated on and she also, gym as well, but maybe revamps her fashion, dyes her hair, that sort of thing. We see this where it's like people are trying to essentially like recalibrate themselves to the competitive landscape.
That makes a lot of sense because you do hear about a lot of guys that when they break up with their girlfriend, they go to the gym, they look great.
The breakup glow up, it's classic. And part of that is trying to recalibrate themselves to whatever competitive signals they got. So this is a very simple concept, but it's one that reveals a lot about human mating. People care more about physical attractiveness during the early days than the later days in a relationship, right? I think we all know that intuitively. I think people find it intuitive. If you are in a long-term relationship, effort on your beauty, therefore, is less important than effort on your other qualities, right? Relative to earlier in the relationship. If you get broken up with, then you get like reset to that early relationship stage where you're like, oh, I have to go back to like, I have to recalibrate my mate value to the mate preferences of the individuals who I'm currently competing for. Because they only care about my looks because they're just meeting me. Whereas my ex, they cared about my personality because they were with me for years, right? So a man goes through this big breakup, and then he does that, or a woman does it, same thing. Now, as far as why physical attractiveness matters more during the early days than the later days, part of it is because physical attractiveness has this informational advantage where it can be discerned immediately, whereas personality traits take a long time. I think the best way to think about it is imagine you're shopping for a car. It makes sense to filter first based on the cars you like the look of, because you can do that immediately, right? Whereas it takes a test drive to actually understand whether the car has the other aspects that you desire. It's the same thing with partners, where it's like, how they look to some degree signals the condition that they likely have inside to a degree, right? You can, to some minor extent, judge books by their covers in the sense that people who are more put together tend to also have advantages in other ways. But then also it's like if you want someone who's good looking and who has a good personality, well, good looks you can filter on quickly and cheaply, whereas filtering on good personality takes a test drive.
So for instance, if I want a new car, I'm going to know that I'm definitely going to want a Range Rover over a Mini because just like the size and the way that it looks. And then when I get to the Range Rover dealership, then I look at all the different varieties and then I sit in there and I do the test drive.
Yeah, and then you go into, so that's how people date as well, where it's like, well, I know I want this ballpark type of person. And then they filter hard for that. Now, when that comes apart is when people are in a situation where they're exposed to someone for a long enough period of time that the Mini versus Range Rover comparison stops mattering. So like, let's say like for whatever reason you had to borrow your friend's Mini mandatorily and then you end up driving and you're like, I actually love this car. That happens with people too, where like their coworker who they met and they're like, this isn't really my type. But then they're forced to spend like months and months and months. Then they can realize like, oh yeah, they're not my type on the surface. But I really do like their personality. And we see that quite a bit. That the longer someone knows someone, the less their looks seem to matter.
Interesting. Okay, so now talk to me about settling. Let's actually take that analogy a little more. So a lot of people will be like, this car's not any good. Like when I got it, it was lovely. It was running fine. It was clean. It was smooth. And now I've had the car for like 20 years and it rattles. But you know what? I just need to get from A to B. So whatever, I'm not going to get a new car. Then think the amount of people that end up settling in marriages and relationships where they're not happy. It isn't good for them, but they just settle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, settling is fundamentally a strategic choice where it's like, well, because you have to at some point, if you want to mate for life, you have to stop searching after a certain point. And you don't have unlimited time to do that. And so it's kind of like a very weird game of musical chairs where it's like, oh, you want to sample enough that like you get a good idea of what you can get, but then you want to pick the best one, right? And because humans mate monogamously largely, it means that anytime you're with someone, you're kind of stuck, right? Like you can't keep searching to the degree that would be like strategically optimal if you're very young. And so you're kind of in this awkward position where it's like, you can either keep the person you have or you can swap them out and try to do better. And I think that a lot of people end up in a position where they're like, well, you know, this person maybe isn't the best, but I'm worried that if I put them to the side, I won't be able to do better. And so I think settling is the strategic choice to be like, hey, this person doesn't fulfill all my mate preferences, but I do think that they fulfill them more than the next person will if I leave them. I also think that there are elements of time pressure involved where it's like, realistically, men have a little bit of a longer shelf life here, but even men, it's like most of them will want to have kids before a certain age and want to get married before a certain age and want to be on a certain, like most men don't want their first child to be at 45, ideally, right? So everyone's kind of on a bit of a time crunch. And so I do think that that probably makes settling more likely as you get later in the search. And there's some evidence for this actually. So if you graph age at first marriage and probability of divorce, it looks kind of like a ski slope, right? Where it's like young people have a really high probability of divorce if they get married. If two 21-year-olds get married, you'd make a lot of money by betting that that couple's gonna get divorced, right? Over and over again. But then as they get older, 24, 25, 26, 27, the divorce rate really, really gets crushed until about 30. Around 30, it bottoms out. So people who get married around 30, they have actually a pretty low divorce risk. And you'd think like, it makes sense that young people have a hard time with marriage because you're young, people change, they're inexperienced, they make bad choices. Makes a lot of sense. I made lots of bad choices when I was that age. So it makes sense that their divorce rate is high and it makes sense that 30 is low. But on that logic, you would expect it to keep going down because you can only get smarter, right? From 31, 32, 33, you're only getting more wise, but instead it starts to bump back up, right? So the divorce rate for a first marriage past 30 is higher. And the reason that Nicholas Wolfinger, I believe, proposed for why this might be the case is essentially it's like a game of musical chairs where you're running out of seats, right? Where it's like the good ones are kind of getting taken off the market, so to say, the good ones. And also you're getting put into this terrible strategic pressure where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm 34, I'm not married, what do I do here, right? And that is what might lead to the uptick, where you end up settling, as you say. So someone might, to put it in plain language, the costs of having to compromise on your mate preferences due to time pressure and due to lack of available options start to uptick around this point.
As you were explaining it, one thing I was thinking of is when you're in your mid-30s, if you're feeling the pressure, like, oh God, like people are looking at me, when you're going to get married, unfortunately, we women get it all the time, like, oh, you're still single at 35.
Yeah.
And so you feel the pressure. Maybe you then make a decision to meet someone like, okay, well.
That's rash.
Yes. And then maybe a few years later, you're like, oh God,
Yep.
I jumped into this because I did the rational thing.
It's almost certainly part of what's happening.
Okay, so I actually want to move on now. What has been the most surprising thing that you have read from a study that really shocked you when it came to maybe the difference between men and women?
Oh, that's a really good question. Most surprising when it came to the difference between men and women. The thing is that very little in my field is surprising, actually, because we are humans. And so if we're talking about human mating, it would be odd if we were surprised by ourselves, right? I think that there are some things that I have found counterintuitive. So I think the most surprising is the lack of sex differences in revealed preference studies.
What do you mean by that?
So when you ask people, how much do you care about looks? Men very consistently across cultures say that they care about looks more than women when dating. And then when you ask them about money, women very consistently say that when dating, they care more about a man's money than a man cares about a woman's money. And so that's a very consistent thing that people say. But then you do these, speed dating experiments or other, romantic evaluations experiments, or look at who people actually end up with. And you find that there aren't that many sex differences, and that both men and women care about looks quite a lot and care about money about the same amount and not that much. Oh. Yeah, so that was very surprising to me, because socially you think, men care more about looks. So to do study designs and find that it's pretty similar in practice, that's a shock, yeah.
That is shocking. And is there anything where when you say it out loud shocks most people?
Men not cheating down in looks. That gets surprises every time. It actually wasn't that surprising to me. I pre-registered, meaning so pre-registering is when you say what the result's gonna be before the study is run. So I believe I actually made a quick note in my pre-registration, maybe men will cheat up in attractiveness. So it didn't actually surprise me that much, but when I speak to people socially, people are surprised that men cheat up in physical attractiveness. And I think that part of it is because people really comfort each other when they get cheated on. So this is an uncomfortable thing to say, but it's just obviously true. When someone gets cheated on, of course, everyone is going to be like, oh, I can't believe they did that. Oh, that other person's so ugly. Like, look at you, you're gorgeous. How could they do that to you? But of course they're going to say that. Right? No one's ever going to say oh, I can see why he did that.
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah. That's being sensitive.
I think that part of the reason why people are surprised by that finding is because we've all kind of collectively been gaslit that the person who's being cheated on is the good one, the hot one, the better person, so to say. And the person being cheated with is worse. And therefore, this is something called the halo effect in psychology, or the where basically people who are good looks and other traits, all good traits are kind of associated with each other. So if someone has done something like be a quote unquote home wrecker or mate poacher, we're gonna say oh, they're not good. And so we're gonna put them down. But that doesn't, just because we have that kind of cultural and social association where we all want it to be true that the person being cheated on is the superior in every way, in theory it doesn't make a lot of sense, and in practice it doesn't seem to be true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, as a woman, if my husband cheated on me, you do want her to be way uglier than you.
Yeah.
Going back to what I said earlier about how you make it about yourself, you do. Am I not pretty enough? Do I need to, dress myself up more? Do I need to put on more makeup? So you make it about yourself. And so this is why I love this interview. I just want to know what we're naturally like. So with something like this, as you're talking, I was like, oh, actually, you're right. If my husband was going to cheat on me, I would just leave. I wouldn't talk to him, literally no excuse, I'm out the door. And my natural inclination would be to go on Instagram and find out who it is and see what she looks like. So now knowing my natural inclination, because I know it's not healthy for me, I now already know that if it was to happen, the first thing I'm gonna do is make sure I don't look at her Instagram because I just know I'll get triggered. And so this is why I love understanding what we're like as humans, because I don't judge it. Like everything you said, like every so often you did a caveat, like this isn't gonna be popular, people aren't gonna like me. Because I understand why people rebel against hearing things that make them uncomfortable. But for me, I go, instead of arguing what you're saying, I want to use it as very useful information so that I now know how I can show up every day. That's why I do this show. It's all about confidence. And so as you were talking, like you've laid out so many beautiful facts and studies about what men are like, what women are like. So I love everything we've spoken about today. You've been absolutely incredible. If people want to go in your world more, where can they go to follow you and all the content you're doing?
Yeah, I'll just kind of quickly respond to what you said there. Thanks for this interview. You've been a wonderful host. I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been great. And yeah, we have the same philosophy. I mean, one saying that I really like, I don't know where it's from, is all facts are friendly. Look, some of these things from my field, they're kind of unpleasant to address. But for the most part, we all kind of knew they were true at some level. And it's nice to be like, okay, well, this is the strategic landscape. I can see clearly what's going on. How can I navigate it in a way that's positive, right? And accept it. In terms of finding me, I make a lot of videos on this stuff. I would say that that's what I'm better known for my videos on science than my actual science itself. And it's mostly communicating other people's science. So if you guys want to learn more about this stuff, just search Macken Murphy on any social media. I try to post as much as I can, and there's just tons of stuff in this genre.
That's so cool. Guys, here at Women of Impact, you come here to build your confidence. And that's why I freaking love covering the psychology and the science. I find both of them so useful. So guys, if you're not following me, follow me at Lisa Bilyeu. Smash that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, be the hero of your own life. Peace.
That was great. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed that.
If you want to go even deeper into how men think, then you've got to watch this video right here with the one and only top neuroscientist, Dr. Andrew Huberman. Please help us women finally understand men with a game I'm calling What's a Man Really Thinking? What's a man really thinking when it